Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to episode 177 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. The FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report is sponsored by Advanced Compliance Solutions. Today I wanted to visit with you about tone in an organization, and specifically how do you drive the culture, the tone of compliance, the culture of compliance, the concepts that you will only do business ethically and in compliance, down from the top, into the middle, and all the way to the bottom of your organization. In this episode, I give you some specific techniques that you can utilize moving forward, and why it's important under really any anti-bribery, anti-corruption regime that you may be under, whether it's the FCPA, the UK Bribery Act, or the OECD 13 Good Practices. The episode comes in just over 20 minutes, and I hope you find it useful. This is Tom Fox, and thank you very much for listening. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again, and today I wanted to visit with you about tone in an organization. I think everyone has heard the concept of tone at the top more times than they care to mention or certainly even remember when it comes to an FCPA compliance program. But today I wanted to visit with you about some techniques that you might utilize to drive tone not only at the top of your organization, but indeed throughout the entire organization. I recently wrote a series of blog posts on this subject, and the response was so great about questions and comments that people had. I thought it would be appropriate to talk about some of these techniques in a blog post to see if they are things that might resonate with you going forward. Although it's only focusing on tone at the top, several of the very foundational laws and guidelines around compliance speak to tone. The U.S. sentencing guidelines talk about tone. They say that high-level personnel and substantial authority personnel of an organization shall be knowledgeable about the content and operation of the compliance and ethics program and shall promote an organizational culture that encourages ethical conduct and a commitment to compliance and the law. The OECD 13 Good Practices, point number 1 says that strong, explicit, and visible support and commitment from senior management to the company's internal controls, ethics, and compliance programs or measures for preventing and detecting foreign bribery are absolutely mandatory. In the 6 principles of adequate procedures under the UK Bribery Act, it states that top-level management of a commercial organization, be it a board of directors, the owners, or other equivalent body or person, are committed to preventing bribery and by persons associated with that company. They foster a culture within the organization in which bribery is never acceptable. And indeed, in the FCPA guidance, which has a section in the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program entitled Commitment from Senior Management and a Clearly Articulated Policy Against Corruption, it states, within a business organization, compliance begins with the board of directors and senior executives setting the proper tone for the rest of the company. Managers and employees take their cues from corporate leaders, and thus the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission consider the commitment of corporate leaders to a culture of compliance and look to see if this high-level commitment is also reinforced and implemented by middle managers and employees at all levels of business. This last articulation from the FCPA guidance, I really think sums it up best of what the regulators in the form of the Department of Justice and Securities and Exchange Commission is looking for. So it certainly starts with tone at the top, but it moves throughout the organization. And based on that, I thought it would be an appropriate podcast to talk about some of the things that you can do. Now, as a compliance officer, chief compliance officer or compliance practitioner, you may not be at the senior levels of management in your company. I hope you would have a seat at the table, but you may be in the position where you need to guide your senior management, the company president, the CEO, on how to communicate this tone against bribery and corruption. Drawing from a talk by Larry Thompson, who is then the Executive Vice President of Government Affairs, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary at PepsiCo, who, in a talk to the State Bar of Texas, said that there were 5 factors which he believed were critical in establishing an effective integrity tone and setting the right tone at the top from senior management. Number 1, the guiding values of the company must make sense and be clearly articulated. The company's leader must be personally committed and willing to take on those values. A company's systems and structures must support its guiding principles. Number 4, a company's values must be integrated into normal channels of management, decision-making, and reflected in the company's critical decisions. And finally, number 5, managers must be empowered to make ethically sound decisions on a day-to-day basis. So this last point speaks to a situation broader than simply the tone at the top. It's driving the concept and the culture of compliance into the middle of the organization. So I'm going to have some thoughts in a minute on how middle managers can drive compliance. But what are some of the things that a CEO can do? Well, I had a client, and when I explained to the CEO what he needed to do as CEO for the company's anti-bribery, anti-corruption compliance program, he looked at me and said, "Oh, I'm the ambassador." And that was the best articulation I believe I've ever heard of what the role of the CEO is. The CEO is the ambassador of compliance. So what are some of the things that as an ambassador a CEO can do? Well, he can certainly reject a do as I say, not as I do mentality and actually lead in compliance. Not just talk the talk of compliance, but also walk the walk of compliance. He can oversee the creation of a written statement about a zero tolerance towards bribery and corruption. Appoint and fully resource with money and headcount resources a chief compliance officer. Oversee the development of a code of conduct and written compliance program. Ensure there are compliance metrics on all key business reports. Provide leadership to middle managers to facilitate filtering down and through of the zero tolerance message throughout the organization. Not only having a whistleblower or reporting line, a speak-up channel, but celebrating that. As the ambassador to talk about doing the right thing. And to make sure that you provide your chief compliance officer with access to yourself and the board of directors. So the ambassador role, I think, really speaks to it as the best description I've ever heard of the role of the company head in compliance. If they talk about doing compliance and then they show that the chief compliance officer has not only a seat at the table, but the tools to do compliance. As I say, it's doing compliance where the rubber meets the road. It's not having a paper program in place. Then your CEO can talk, can do put on videos, you can write emails. There's a wide variety of social media channels that a CEO can use moving forward. And you as the chief compliance officer or the compliance practitioner need to facilitate this for your CEO and help them to help you drive compliance into the very fabric of your company, the DNA, if you will. So once you have the CEO on board and you have the CEO as the ambassador of compliance within your organization, what can you do to drive the tone into the middle of the organization and have the managers who work under the CEO really drive this home, this message of compliance? So how do middle managers manage, and resources they are given, and how do they communicate the culture of compliance to their direct reports, to their troops who work for them? Well, think about how you would communicate to an employee on any other topic. Do you have passion? Is compliance and doing business ethically and in compliance with not only the law, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, but with your code of conduct and what other statement or internal rules and regulations or controls that your company has in place? Do you have a passion for doing business in compliance? 2, humility and integrity. I think it's very important to interact with humility and integrity with employees. If you treat them like third graders, you're going to get actions from third graders. So treat your coworkers with respect and dignity, and coworkers, treat your direct reports. Courage. You have to give and communicate to the troops who work for you that they can speak up. If they have an important idea, or more importantly, if they disagree with you as a manager, you have to give them the license, you have to give them the space, and you have to make it a safe place where they can speak up. This directly ties into your compliance program, because if direct reports of middle managers are afraid to bring ethical violations or even ethical questions to their middle managers, they'll get buried and they won't be raised to the appropriate level of authority. And so having the courage to speak up is something that you, as a middle manager, must communicate to your troops. Curiosity. You want people to work for you, to question and learn, not only about their specific job duties, but about the greater culture of the company. How do you communicate that as a middle manager? Is it important to you? Are these things that you're bringing, whether they be lunch and learns, whether they be webinars, whether they be books you're assigning to read, whether they be ebooks, hard books, are you bringing a curiosity to your direct reports? Are you allowing them to be curious within a broader context of doing business going forward? Next, impact. Is your message of compliance as a middle manager having an impact at your company? If so, how do you know that? Are you measuring that? Are you getting people talking about it? Do you have a compliance moment at your meetings? Do you assign readings on compliance? There's a wide variety of things to see if you have made an impact. And here, as with all of these other factors and points, you're really only limited by your imagination. But are you being impactful around compliance? And then be outward looking. Do good and do right by your direct reports, and they will do good and do right by you. Obviously, this ties into one of our earlier points of integrity. If you treat people right, they will treat you right back more often than not. But all of this really works together to demonstrate a culture which allows questions to be raised, which allows people to speak up, which allows employees to raise their hand and say, this doesn't make sense to me. If there's, unfortunately, FCPA enforcement actions are littered with situations where if an employee had the courage to simply raise their hand and say, this doesn't make sense to me, it might have stopped an illegal act before it occurred. So all of these points go together, and as a middle manager, if you can articulate these to your direct reports, you will be doing certainly a very good job. Next, tone at the bottom. And this one is really where I think a lot of compliance practitioners, chief compliance officers, senior managers really miss the boat, because it's the frontline troops that not only are most exposed when it comes to potential bribe situations, but also it's the frontline troops who know what's going on as well as anyone else. They're out on the front lines. They're doing the day-to-day sales work. They're doing the day-to-day business. And so you need to foster a culture which allows these employees to communicate their cares and concerns back to you as a middle manager or indeed a senior manager. So how can you take a culture of compliance that your CEO has set, your senior manager has followed through, and middle management has bought into because they believe it as well? Well, there are a list of suggestions that I have for you, and these all come from an article in the Sloan Management Review entitled Uncommon Sense: How to Turn Distinctive Beliefs into Actions, by authors Jules Goddard, Julian Birkinshaw, and Tony Eccles. And so where they explored the often overlooked critical source of differentiation in a company's beliefs. And certainly a culture of compliance is a company belief. So what do they suggest? Well, they have 7. Number 1, assemble a group. Assemble a group of employees who certainly have challenges in doing business in your company, and talk to them about how to do business in compliance and give them the tools to do so. 2, ask questions. This means not only giving people the space to raise their hand and speak up, but asking directly. Talk about the assumptions of your compliance model. Does it make sense? What problems are employees having? And find out how it's working out in the field. Next, categorize the responses. Now, this is really the work of the compliance practitioner, because you have to put these responses into what the authors call common beliefs, and then translate that into action steps for your compliance programs. After you have made this categorization, test these common beliefs. Are they a hard fact? Are they nonsense? Are they a belief that is really in the range or realm of a law of nature? How hard are those beliefs? So the belief that, for instance, you cannot do business without paying bribes and corruption. I think that's a fallacy, and I think that's been shown time and time again. But if that is a common belief within your company, that needs to be addressed. What about the other characterization or categorization the authors suggest from responses, which are uncommon beliefs? What information or experiences is based on, and is there a way for you to test these uncommon beliefs? Then reassemble your group and explain what you've come up with, and lead a discussion to identify any assumptions or beliefs that are possibly wrong or possibly worth experimenting with, or conversely worth experimenting with. I think this is a way to demonstrate or provide concrete steps for employees at the bottom to do business in compliance, and it's been explained to them that you have taken their cares and concerns and prepared responses to them, and then shared those with them, and then go out in the field and try these. So I found this was a very interesting way to think through communicating to the tone at the bottom. But the technique, you basically just put people down and listen to what they said. Now, you have driven the conversation as the compliance officer or as the middle manager, and certainly that is an important function as well. But you've listened to their concerns. You have tied their concerns about doing business and brought back to them specific techniques to do business and answer the questions they have about how compliance fits into their role within the company. So these general techniques are important, and as one thing I've learned as a lawyer and compliance practitioner over the years, you're really only limited by your own imagination. So there's a variety of other things that you can do and try, but these are some of the techniques that I've come across and utilized and seen work in the compliance field, which would allow you to drive the tone of compliance, the culture of compliance, and the message of compliance from the very top of your organization into the middle of the organization and then down to the bottom of the organization. Of course, with everything you do in your compliance function, you need to document this. Each step needs to be documented. Each articulation, to the extent you can, should be documented. If a president, as the ambassador, speaks to a group, you don't have to record what he said, but you certainly need to document that those remarks were made, because when the government comes knocking, they're going to want to see what is your culture of compliance and how have you communicated that culture of compliance all the way down your organization. As the FCPA guidance articulated in the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program, it has to go from the boardroom to the shop floor. So I hope you have found these techniques useful. I have a couple of calls to action for you. First of all, if you could rate this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it. And the second thing is, I'm developing a list of questions for my next mailbag episode. So if you have any questions on this or any other questions you would like explored on a podcast, I would greatly appreciate if you would email me with your questions. You can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. This is Tom Fox, and thank you very much for listening.